We believe that being a defender requires more than building shooting skills on a range. It's also a development of the heart, mind, body, and spirit. Join us as we explore what it truly means to be a defender in your training and in your everyday life. Welcome to Defenders Live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Defenders Live. I am your host, Laura Thorson, and we are back again on a Wednesday evening, and I'm so glad that you're with me. We are back on our original format. We are live, and we are staying live for the duration tonight. So let me know in the comments if, as we go along, you're preferring this live or if you liked our pre-recorded shows previously. I have a feeling you're going to like it live, but we are back to our original format, and tonight we'll be talking to Chris Cypert of Citizens Defense Research about practical solutions for personal safety. But I'll be leading Chris into that conversation in a way you might not expect. In fact, it might be going the long way around the barn just a little bit, but I think it'll be really beneficial to all of us. So I think you'll really enjoy it. So stay tuned for that. Before we get to Chris, though, I do have a few announcements. So first of all, thank all of you beautiful people for attending tonight. I'm so glad that you're with me. If you're new or watching as a replay, welcome. We're so glad you're here. Please shout out in the comments where you're watching from. I want to hear from you. And we're bringing back our live Q&A session that we've always had for our live broadcast. So at the end of this broadcast, we'll be doing a live Q&A with Chris Cypert. So be thinking of questions for him. If something pops in your head along the way, just type it in the comments and we'll gather those at the end of the broadcast. I have a feeling there will be a lot of meat on the bones of what Chris will have to say tonight, so I'm looking forward to it. Also, if you haven't yet joined the Defenders Live Facebook group or the locals community on locals.com, I'll be talking about that a little bit later, please be sure to do that as well. And be sure to go to defenders-live.com for all things Defenders Live. And tonight I have another announcement too I'm kind of excited about. Adam Winch, the founder of Defenders USA, is back behind the scenes helping me again tonight. He has been gone for quite some time. He's been on the road and he's still on the road. He was teaching for 10 days in Montana and then went over to Missouri for a few days teaching there. And now tonight he is in Kansas with the Active Self-Protection National Conference. He'll be teaching there as well. And Defenders USA instructors Brent Hickman of Haven Defense Company, one of our partners here at Defenders Live, and Russell Anthon are also there this week, helping lots of people at the national conference. So we're excited for that and looking forward to it. Shout out in the comments if you have taken a class from any of these great guys, and let us know your thoughts about that as well. If you're interested in signing up for any Defenders USA classes or want to learn more about that, you can go to defenders-usa.com. So a huge thanks to Adam for helping me out tonight. I need all the help I can get. You guys know that. So let me get on here to our special guest, Chris Cypert. So Chris Cypert is a retired Special Forces soldier, Green Beret, who spent the majority of his career serving in 5th Special Forces Group, Airborne Division. He's a veteran of multiple deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, as well as numerous other operational deployments. He is experienced in the full spectrum of violence and threat mitigation, from full-scale combat to low visibility and avoidance in uncertain environments. As a professional teacher of partner forces who culminated his career teaching advanced skills to qualified special operations personnel, Chris is highly experienced and proficient in curriculum development and training. He is a RangeMaster certified firearms instructor, an NRA Certified Pistol Instructor, Agile Training and Consulting OC pepper spray instructor, and has attended a broad variety of open-enrollment firearm and self-defense courses geared towards helping civilian self-protection. Chris works hard to translate his experience and lessons learned into the civilian self-protection context in order to help him better safeguard himself and his family, and also benefit the lawfully armed citizens who want to protect themselves and those for whom they are responsible. So let's welcome Chris Cypert onto the show. Hey, Chris. Oh, you're muted. Let me unmute you. I think you have to unmute yourself. Can you find it? There you are. Oh, I still can't hear you. Nope. So it shows that you're muted, Chris, and then when you unmute yourself, I still can't hear you. Now I can, I bet. Try that.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you are. There you are.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Don't you love the technical difficulties?
Yeah, apologies. That's 100% my fault. I'm a bit of a Luddite. I probably should have been born 200 years ago.
Yeah, that's okay. All right, we got through that. That's no big deal. So you weren't here when I was talking about going the long way around the barn earlier.
Nope.
So Chris doesn't really know this, but he's pretty much game for anything. And I talked to him earlier about, hey, is there anything we can't talk about? Well, there's a few things, but for the most part, he's game. So we're obviously going to get to some of the practical solutions for personal safety. That's the title of the show, right? So we're going to get to that. But I do have some questions to lead us there. And I think it would be benefit for everyone for us to go this route because we talk about this a lot, about being a defender is a lot more than being proficient with whatever, your firearm or OC spray or whatever. It's about a lot more than that. And you're somebody that absolutely understands that more than many that I talk to. So the reason that I want to get into this a little bit different way is because you actually have a blog, Chris, called Amplified Being. And I encourage all of you to go to amplifiedbeing.com and check out Chris's blog. But this blog gives a lot of perspective and insight into you, actually, I think, in your thought process. But also, I think there are some threads that are tied in through some of those blogs that I think could help lead into this topic tonight. And at first glance, people might not see the connection, but I certainly did see some threads here that I'd like to dive into, if you're cool with that. But before we dive into that, I was wondering, I want to bridge a gap here first. And I want you to talk a little bit about, so how can a Green Beret, with the experience that you have, how can you help bridge the gap in understanding how what you learned in the military applies to everyday citizens, and then also your role as a Green Beret too? Because I think I've heard you say that in essence, a Green Beret is a teacher, or that's part of your role and mission. So could you speak to that as well? Oh, you're muted again.
I didn't mute myself. I don't know why I keep doing that. Apologies. Okay.
I didn't do that.
You got me now?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So yeah, within the special operations community, it's really easy to find. Like, you get on YouTube or anywhere, and you'll find these videos like who's better, Green Berets or Navy SEALs or whatever, right? And the reality is that within special operations, the community at large, it's we're various. Is a screwdriver better than a hammer? Well, it depends on what you need. And so, special forces, what we do primarily is we focus on unconventional warfare, which I won't bore you with the definition of, but thanks, babe. And so what we do is we work with partner forces. Either we work with governments we like against guerrillas and rebels that we don't, or we work with guerrillas and rebels we like against governments we don't. But what that entails primarily is teaching, training, advising those partner forces, and typically for us that often includes use of foreign language. So, like, I'm an Arabic speaker, and I spent most of my adult life teaching our partners how to do, it could be anything from like anti-armor weapon systems to mortars to medical classes, and then often in Arabic, for our partner forces, whether it be, like counter-terrorist troops in Jordan, it could be Iraqi, soldiers in Iraq. And so, yeah, teaching is what I've primarily done. And the really valuable aspect of that is that to teach well, you have to have a substantial capacity for empathy, because most people do not, without having put any thought into it. If you ask somebody like, "Hey, explain to everybody how to do this thing, whatever this thing is, whatever this task might be," and so the problem is with that approach is that we as humans always default to explaining it in the way that makes sense to us, or teaching it in the way that we would learn it
Mhm.
best. And the problem is that human beings have a very divergent, there's very divergent modalities that different people, like to learn and receive information, and receive communication in various different ways. And the more you teach, the more familiar you become with that, just through, like, it's unavoidable. And then the more you formally study teaching and instruction, the more you run into that, where uh, explaining something in a way that makes sense to a 19-year-old Afghan farmer, who just joined his local police force. The guy's got a very, very different frame of reference than I do.
Mhm.
And so where that's helped me in the civilian world is, again, I've got to look at what instruction is being delivered, and not just instruction, but self-defense thinking and everything else. If I walk into a classroom to teach a bunch of just normal everyday Americans, in the way that I would teach a bunch of special operations guys, um, that doesn't make a whole ton of sense, right? So you have to
Mhm.
begin with the end in mind, to quote Stephen Covey, of course, the author from Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, and okay, who are these people and what do they really need? And that's really informed my entire journey as a self preservation instructor. I like to think of myself as,
Yeah.
last 3 years is, uh, you know tactical fantasy camps, where everybody puts on, body armor and grabs M4s and goes and clears building stuff. So long as it's done safely, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong at it.
Mhm.
It's fun. It's tons of fun. It's fun to shoot ARs and clear rooms with teammates and so forth. However, the reality of it is that, that doesn't help you with what, the average American who's not military, not police officer, doesn't help them with what they need to be able to accomplish to preserve their lives and the lives of their loved ones. And
Mhm.
so, uh, the other thing that we do a lot of as special forces guys, Green Berets specifically, is, um, if it were a straight up like physical fitness contest, because we tend to skew older. Like, I'd be like, yeah, bet on the SEALs, bet on the Rangers, because they're going to be 10 years younger than your typical, experienced special forces dude. But our thing is being thinkers and being smart. Not to say that, obviously those younger branches, younger communities are not, but planning and thinking through, like, okay, what is our
Mhm.
desired end? Like, what are we trying
Mhm.
to achieve? Working backwards from there and coming out with a plan, planning for different contingencies that could interrupt our, pursuit of that overall end state. And that is something that, very much, whether you're an insurance salesman from Idaho who's just trying to, stop at the gas station and stop and get groceries on the way home and not die in a carjacking, or whether you're
Mhm.
trying to capture some terrorist or whatever else, the same planning principles apply. And that's something I've been able to incorporate in a lot of what I do as an instructor.
Thank you for saying that. That's what I was trying to drive home because I didn't want there to be such a disconnect from, okay, I'm just a mom. I haven't even purchased a gun yet. I'm just pretending to be this person, right? I'm a mom. It's
Mhm.
not even purchased a gun yet. What can this dude tell me, about my everyday life and, putting my kid in the car seat at the grocery store kind of a thing that can help me in my everyday life. And so I wanted to just drive that home and let people know if they haven't seen you before or they don't know you, you absolutely can give some everyday practical solutions for the way that we can make better decisions in our everyday life. And I'll let you get into all that. But before we do that, then, this is, like I said, the long way around the barn, and this is going to take me a minute. But I do think this is important. So I'm going to touch on it. On your blog, you have a post, and it is a rather long post, but guys, go read the whole thing. I tried to condense it as much as I could, but it really intrigued me. And that is this, the post I'm talking about, the blog post is called True and False Manliness. Now, when I go through some of these qualities of what this author, James Freeman Clark, talks about manliness, I want you to realize and think about this as I'm reading it. These are qualities that I believe all humans, most humans, should aspire to be like as a good human being in society. Some of them are specific to being a man, but others I believe are just good qualities, right? And I'm going to have Chris help me tie this in, and I think he'll obviously do a better job of it than I ever could. But these are just some of the things that this blog post talks about and what it says. So one of the things that it says manliness does not exclude is gentleness, tenderness, compassion, and modesty. Modesty is a big one, and humbleness is a big one that we talk about in the self-defense world, and we'll tie that in just a little bit. Now, hang with me here. I'm going to read some of this. This is brilliant, and I'm really glad that Chris this is coming from the book that James Freeman Clark wrote. So these aren't Chris's words, but he's putting this in his blog. Okay. The manly spirit shows itself in enterprise, the love of meeting difficulties and overcoming them, the resolution which will not yield, which patiently perseveres and does not admit the possibility of defeat. It enjoys hard toil, rejoices in stern labor, is ready to make sacrifices, to suffer and bear disaster patiently. It is generous, giving itself to a good cause, not its own. It is public spirited, devoting itself to the general good with no expectation of reward. It is ready to defend unpopular truth, to stand by those who are wrong, to uphold the weak. Having resolved, it does not go back, but holds on through good report and evil, sure that the right must win at last. And so it causes truth to prevail and keeps up the standard of noble purpose in the world. Wow. There's some other qualities in here too that I want to touch on for the purpose of what our topic of our show is. Therefore, if we wish to be manly, we must not do anything of which we are ashamed. He who lives by firm principles of truth and right, who deceives no one, injures no one, who therefore has nothing to hide, he alone is manly. The bad man may be audacious, but he has no true courage. His manliness is only a pretense, an empty shell, a bold demeanor with no real firmness behind it. True manliness is humane. It says, we who are strong enough to bear the infirmities of the weak, its work is to protect those who cannot defend themselves, to stand between the tyrant and the slave, the oppressor and his victim. And a couple more things, and then I'll be done here. True manliness is tender and loving. False manliness is cold, hard, cynical, and contemptuous. The bravest and most heroic souls are usually the most loving. True manliness differs from the false in its attitude to women. Its knightly feeling makes it wish to defend her rights, to maintain her claims, to be her protector and advocate. False manliness wishes to show its superiority by treating women as inferiors. It flatters them, but it does not respect them. It fears their competition on equal levels and wishes to keep them confined. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but did you hear some of those qualities that were talked about in that book? And honestly, like I said, many of those are just traits of being a decent human being. How do these, or the lack thereof of some of these traits, potentially affect someone who is trying to make good decisions in life, who is a protector of their family and of themselves? We talk about mental agility, and we're talking about personal safety. So as it relates to all those things, could you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I do want to touch on one really important precept where you talk about how, a lot of those qualities are just, not necessarily exclusive to men. And certainly, so I am not, for everybody out there, in addition to my background, like I'm literally struggling through trying to finish up my bachelor's degree, BA in history, within the next, calendar year, God willing. And yeah, I'm not some kind of scholar or anything like that, but I do try to be a pretty deep thinker, be pretty cerebral about really any meaningful topic. And one of the things that I think we get wrong in society, and right now in society we are struggling with issues of, like sex and gender and just, roles of different types of people in society and all this other stuff, and not getting into any of that. But one of the things that, the author in that passage uses, talks about manliness, but I think that when we talk about masculinity and femininity, those terms become synonymous. And again, this is just a kind of a pet hobby of mine. Those terms become synonymous with male and female. Masculine is male, feminine is female, and to a certain extent that's true. But I think that I think of it in terms personally of like masculine traits and feminine traits. And for myself, I think that while obviously, as the, in my family, I'm the husband, I'm the dad. And so I'm going to have a preponderance of masculine traits, but, there are, overwhelmingly courage is associated with masculinity and compassion is associated with femininity. Well, that's not a bad thing. I think that I need to have certain elements of feminine traits or whatever. And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. If I can't be tender when one of my kids needs tenderness, and that is part of being a manly man, but I think that that's if you're all masculine all the time or all feminine all the time, you're unbalanced. And I think that, as you say, any human being needs to be able to summon noble masculine qualities and noble feminine qualities at the appropriate time. So how that relates to self-protection. Now, I have my own personal, religious and philosophical beliefs that don't need to be dived into here. So speaking in a specifically secular way about behaviors, I believe, so I'm a hardcore advocate of manners and decorum, just in general. And I think that one of the things that our society is struggling with right now as well, just generally, and I think the social media and kind of the internet tough guy thing, it contributes to this, is just an increase in the ability to say things online that you would never say to somebody's face because there might be physical consequences along with it. But then that bleeds over into real life, where we all see these videos where somebody acts as if they're talking trash to somebody over Xbox Live and then gets knocked out or whatever else. And so we have a problem with it from that perspective. And I also think in the training community, in the community of people concerned with self-protection, self-preservation, self-defense, we have this false archetype of the alpha male, tough guy, whatever, right? And I think that's foolish, and I think it's wrong, and I'll tell you why. If for no other reason, if we lived in a purely material universe, manners, I would posit in that universe where everything was just a result of natural processes, that manners and respect and decorum for other people, both people and people are an evolutionary element of self-preservation. And what I mean by that is, there's a famous quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it pulled up in front of me, from Robert Conrad, the author, Joseph Conrad. I'm sorry, Robert Conrad's an actor. Joseph Conrad, who wrote Conan the Barbarian, that the civilized man is often basically far more rude than the savage, because the savage knows he could have his skull split for being rude to the wrong person. And so in the trappings of our modern civilization, we forget sometimes that manners and respect, in ancient history and appropriate social behavior towards one another came about largely to keep people from killing one another. And so the number one thing by far that people are murdered over in the United States, or just attacked in general, it's not money, it's not drugs, it's not romantic relationships, it's respect. More people, by an order of magnitude, are killed or assaulted.
Perception of respect, yeah.
Yeah, are killed over a lack of respect or disrespect than anything else. Respect or the lack thereof is something that's hugely important in our society, and in any society, right? And so one of the first principle as it relates to self-preservation, in my mind, beyond all the other great benefits of it, which I could talk about, ad nauseum, is that if you just learn how to be polite and respectful to people, and patient with people, and understanding and compassionate and empathetic with people. Doesn't mean being weak, doesn't mean being a pushover, but just through those softer virtues, you can eliminate. By the way, I like making up just random statistics to prove a point. I have no scientific backing. So let's just say that if just by handling road rage incidents or fighting over shopping carts or the stuff that just generally people have friction over in their day-to-day lives, if you handle those engagements with strangers with grace and compassion and patience, you're eliminating 70% of the completely avoidable possible confrontations you could get into. And now we only have to worry about the human predators that are out there looking for people to victimize. And so I think that from a purely practical perspective, I think it's tremendously important for people to understand that, like, the guy you see on the internet who's basically a raging jerk, and he's got and not everybody's got tattoos and their beard is a jerk. I have tattoos and a beard, but the archetypical just school bully kicking sand in the face of wimps and acting like a tough guy. Like, I just tell it like it is, and like all that stuff. That's not it. Not only is it not it, but those people are typically incredibly insecure. And if you want to improve your personal safety, learning graciousness and compassion and patience with people, both people you know and people you don't, is the biggest step. I tell people all the time, and this is the last thing I'll say about it until unless you want to hit more on it. every private pistol lesson that I teach, people, and really what people want is they just they want to shoot fast, look cool, right? What they're going to hear from me is, if you've not read the book How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
I was just getting ready to bring that up. That's perfect.
Buy that book and read it, because at the end of the day, if you can just win friends and influence people positively and without using any kind of force, that's going to make you that will do more to increase your personal safety for the kind of violent encounters that overwhelmingly normal people get into, which are road rage incidents. People cutting people off in the daycare pickup line, crazy stuff like that. And if you can figure out how to navigate those situations for having, gun, pepper spray, kung fu, all that stuff is going to go way, way down for the vast majority of your interactions with other human beings.
Totally agree. And I'm so glad to hear it coming from, no offense, but you look like a manly man, right? So it's so good to hear that coming from you, because I think that I don't know that that's touched on a whole lot. And I'm so glad that you talk about that. I also think it's important to have intellectual honesty, being honest with yourself about where you are, whether it's your skill set or just, in general, just knowing yourself is really important to be able to handle those kind of interactions, whatever they may be. So that How to Win Friends and Influence People is another blog post of yours, which I think is your top 10 books. There's actually more than 10 listed, but I thought it was interesting, and this is kind of a side note joke, but tell me why Lonesome Dove is on your list.
So Lonesome Dove, and it's funny you say that, because first off, Lonesome Dove, for those of you, and I realize this is super tangential to what we're talking about, but for those of you that are literary nerds, and just like good writing, Larry McMurtry is a genius and a master of writing novels. But the reason I love Lonesome Dove is because of the characters. And all of there's a bunch of characters in it, but they're all pretty well developed. But the two primary characters that we're looking at are these two retired, and of course this takes place in like the 1880s, I believe. The two characters are retired Texas Ranger captains who are best buds, but polar opposites. They've been together for 20, 30 years, whatever it's been. And they run a cattle ranch. They end up doing this cattle drive. And they're two very different people. Woodrow Call and Gus McCrae. And in the miniseries, great too. You should watch that. Tommy Lee Jones plays Woodrow Call, and then Gus McCrae is played by Robert Duvall, who's awesome. And those two gentlemen both embody specifically traits traits in people. And I say men for myself, and I want to be clear on this too. The reason, and I get called out on my blog about this sometimes, where I'll be discussing young men and masculinity and stuff, and it's not I wouldn't presume to speak for like women and, ideal, feminine, womanly virtue and that kind of thing. That's just not my lane. But for men, and I would say in people in general, like I was saying about earlier about being well balanced and having the capacity for courage when it's necessary and compassion when it's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
If you put both Gus McCrae and Woodrow Call are very flawed people in their own ways.
Yeah.
And if you put them together, they'd actually be one really, 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 really healthy person. Woodrow Call is a workaholic who's like all business, no fun, super courageous, just works his butt off. And it has a ton of admirable traits. Gus McCrae is frankly probably my favorite character in all of fiction, or top three anyway. And Gus basically enjoys life really easily, and he can rise to the occasion, when it comes to courage and work ethic when need be. But he also can basically stop and smell the roses. And I think there's a lot to emulate in those two characters. That as you read them, they're very, very real, very, very well realized.
They're relatable.
And in reading those, and what's really funny too is the last thing I'll say about it. But yeah, it's a brilliant book. The thing I really think's hilarious is Larry McMurtry, who wrote the book, intended to write a book that basically showed, because most Western writing, like Louis L'Amour, whatever, which is great, it really romanticizes the Old West and like just remember the good stuff kind of thing.
Yeah.
McMurtry wanted to write a book that was basically like dark and harrowing and brutal, and like half the people you come to care about die from everything from snake bites to Indians to you name it. And basically, he wanted to grab people by the shoulders and shake them about the Old West and be like, this wasn't a romantic period in history. It sucked. And you should be basically revolted by what a savage world it was and what a savage world they lived in. But he did his job too well. And it basically always kind of bugged him that people like loved this book and loved these characters. And it basically increased like love and nostalgia for the Old West even further.
Oh, funny.
He did such a great job.
I didn't know that. Huh. Learned something new. Okay, let's get back on track, Chris. All right.
Yep.
So where I was going with all of the talk about the blog and 70% of violence, interpersonal violence is avoidable, right? So that's important to know. So now that we've established that baseline, let's get into some most common scenarios that you would see the average civilian in the United States getting themselves into. What are those, and what are some steps we can learn to help mitigate those? I know that's a broad question.
No. That's I mean, a lot of it we've already touched on actually. So, out of my class menu, I don't even at this point. One of these days down the road, I'm sure I will, but I don't even teach a carbine class, like a rifle, an AR-15 centric class. Partly because there's plenty of good dudes out there doing it, and until I really find something that I think like, oh, cool, this will be worthwhile. My focus since I retired and became a open enrollment instructor has been on the mental processes for self-preservation. And like I've got Melody and I teach public encounters, but all that's focused on thinking and target discriminating with a gun in your hand and identifying threats and that kind of thing. And then I have a force on force class that is all scenario based. However, I touch on that in this class, and I'll be able to delve a little deeper into it here. That class focuses on stranger-initiated violence. And before I even begin to talk about stranger-initiated violence, I think it's worth saying, and again, depending on your source, you can find all manner of statistics. And that's why I think, I'm not going to bore people with, 69.2%. Overwhelming. The average person who's like not a soldier, not a cop, and even when they're off duty, cops and soldiers, the average person is much, much more likely to face violence from someone they know than a stranger. We kind of have
told us that.
What's that? Yeah. And Ross
told us that. Yep.
Super sharp dude. Because we have a lot of these inverse thought processes where like how we feel is almost the opposite. For example, if you had and again, these are my made up statistics. If you had 100 gun owners who had guns for personal defense, and you said, hey, why did you buy this gun? 90+% of them would say to protect my home. When in reality, overwhelmingly, home-centric crime or either completed or attempted burglaries where somebody's trying to break into what they think is an unoccupied home. And if you happen to be there, you can generally solve that problem with cat burglars by flipping on a hallway light and going, "Who's there?" And they'll turn and run away. They're not looking for a violent confrontation. Um, and the few times a year you do see a news story where there's like 4 armed men with rifles and ski masks kicking in a door. Frankly, overwhelmingly, that's either a drug stash house or a suspected drug stash house. Like a drug gang is basically like, hey, there's $1 million worth of heroin in this basement. We're going to kick in the door. That kind of thing does happen extremely rarely, but overwhelmingly, most home-centric violence is not, or most home-centric crime is not violent in its intent. It's like, I'm going to steal something out of their storage shed or break into their house and not there. Overwhelmingly, violence happens outside the home, except for domestic violence. And then even within violence outside the home, you're still more likely to get victimized by somebody you know. Because think about it, that certainly, depending on where you live, people get carjacked, people get robbed. But if you live outside of cities with, 1 million plus people, let's say like big city, I think technically is defined as like over 400,000. So if you live in anywhere smaller than El Paso, Texas, or somewhere similarly sized, most violence where you live is my dog is pooping in my neighbor's yard. And my neighbor comes over to confront me about it. And what I don't know is his wife is cheating on him with her coworker, and his 16-year-old daughter just got pregnant, and he's going to get laid off from work. And he's got all these other problems that are just building up. And he's not a criminal, yet. He's about to become one. He comes over and confronts me. And if I don't handle it well, next thing you know, we're either fist fighting in the front yard or guns are coming out. And if you just Google like neighbor murders neighbor or something like that, you will get tons and tons of hits over dogs crapping in yards. You need to turn your music down because you're having wild parties. Or like there was an incident in Philadelphia a year or two ago that was literally up north, for those of you who live up north, or like where you're at, where there's lots of snow. In big cities where there's lots of snow, people will spend 20 minutes shoveling a parking spot for their car because they'll have it like double parked somewhere, then they'll pull it into that spot. But what will happen a lot of times is you clear a spot, go back to get your car, and by the time you get back, somebody's been like, "Oh, how convenient," and they just steal your shovel spot. There was a double murder in Philadelphia. It was 2 neighbors, and it was a dispute over they'd shoveled a spot. The dude had parked in it. Guns came out, and the guy literally like shot them both with a pistol, went back inside and got his rifle, came back out and murdered a husband and a wife with a rifle. We tend to picture the people that we need to worry about as strangers with ski masks, right? The crackhead looking dude coming up to us with a knife or a gun at the gas pump. And that exists. But if you're going to start anywhere, start with relational violence. And that doesn't mean your spouse necessarily, although there is a component of that. But getting into, I guess, the acquaintance violence, whether it be coworkers, whether it be neighbors and that kind of thing, the number one thing that you need to recognize, all right, now that I think I've framed it as far as kind of the acquaintance-based relational violence stuff, is we live, and I alluded to this earlier, we live in a civilization that is safer than basically any humans before us could ever possibly imagine. And it doesn't seem that way from a, if you get on social media, it's just one bad thing after another. But by and large, life's pretty good in modern America. The downside of that is that we get this normalcy bias where we come to believe that because I've never dealt with violence in my life, I never will. And then all of a sudden, violence does start percolating up. And maybe it hasn't kicked off yet, but the warning signs are there. One of the biggest failures in any kind of personal protection, whether it be, again, neighbors dispute or carjacking, people get into this normalcy bias where all the indicators are there in hindsight that something was about to pop off. And there were certainly a number of courses of action that, the eventual victim could have taken to either avoid entirely, de-escalate, deter, whatever it was, and keep it from getting to the eventual violent conclusion. But frankly, what interrupted their thought, but like what kept them from making those conclusions is just denial and disbelief. You know, I
Yeah,
live
it's not
I
gonna
live in
happen to me. Yeah.
right, and so if
Yeah.
you so famed trainer Tom Gibbons, who runs RangeMaster, Tom's legend and a mentor. Um, he talks about, because he was a Memphis police officer for many decades, and he talked about how he had interviewed um, dozens of murder victims, is how he framed it. And what he meant was, is these were people who basically should have been dead, but they got shot or stabbed and lived. But ultimately, the intent of the other person was to kill them. And the two
Mhm.
things that I always heard as he was interviewing them was people would be asking the question either in their mind or out loud while the attack was being initiated and being conducted, was either um, why are you doing this, or I can't believe this is happening to me. And
Yeah.
I think that latter one's really important, because
Mhm.
I'm going to tell everybody here a secret. Um, and this is nuanced, and I hope everybody can stay with me here, because nuance can be dangerous when talking to large audiences, and a lot of trainers stay away from it for that reason. There's a lot of gun people who seem a little trigger happy and a little too eager to, if you go to licensed carry classes, they'll be like, oh, if somebody does this, can I shoot them then? You're like, well,
Mhm.
can is the wrong question, right? We don't shoot somebody when we can, we shoot somebody when we have to. And so a lot has been said about, um, if you end up having to shoot somebody or take someone's life, how much it's going to emotionally devastate you and how serious a business it is and everything else. Because what we're trying to do is get people to take the responsibility of using lethal force seriously. And that's a good thing.
Mhm.
However, some people will be emotionally devastated by that, by having to use lethal force. Some people won't. And the reason for that is everybody listening to this or watching this right now, myself, you, Laura, everybody, we are all descendants of the human beings who were the best at violence. The way natural selection works is at some point in time in history, every one of our ancestors at somewhere in our lineage fought over resources, fought over survival somehow. And basically the people that were like better at fighting to survive, lived and had kids, and the people that weren't didn't. Um, Violence is inherent in human DNA at this point. It just is. And so when I talk to um, self preservers, self protectors, um, I want to make clear to them, like, look, yeah, you need to understand the legal, moral, and ethical ramifications of using lethal force. You definitely don't need to be casual about it, but um, don't for a second think that you couldn't harm or even kill someone to survive if you absolutely had to, because that's what human beings do. That's what we've done for a very long time. And it's in all of us, essentially. Um, and frankly, to make a pretty emphatic statement, fighting and even killing for survival, I think, is one of the two most natural activities in which a human being can engage if you look at human history, the other one being procreation. And so that being said, so that's how we can look at it for ourselves. We're like, I think people worry too much about, like, will I or won't I be able to use force when it comes time to protect myself? Because if it is, I am going to die or I'm going to use force, I think most people will find it a little bit easier to use force than they expect. The reason I bring it up here, though, is because when you're dealing with your angry neighbor over the double parking issue, or when your coworker is, somebody has stolen their lunch, and they're irate about it, and you got the opportunity to either show compassion and be like, yeah, man, that's messed up, or to crack a joke and tell them to calm down and basically just piss them off. That coworker in your insurance office or IT department, or your neighbor in the suburbs and wherever, Mississippi, is also descendant of a line of killers. And if you're not careful, and if you don't consider that, and always look to de-escalate rather than escalate situations, by asserting your sense of rightness or whatever, you can very, very easily stumble into these relational engagements where, man, this person rear-ended me, or I rear-ended this person, and they're irritated about it, um, and but I'd rather be right than calm the situation down. So I'm going to meet
Mhm.
them where they're at, argue with them, and keep escalating things. It can
Yeah.
happen, and it doesn't matter why, and it doesn't have to be rational. Every person you interact with on a daily basis if you piss them off bad enough or paint them into enough of a corner, can decide they want to hurt you.
And then
that's
there
where,
might not be even reason at all. I mean,
no,
literally, you could
yeah.
say something and they could be a psychopath. Who knows?
The late great William April, who was a psychologist who was forensic psych who dealt with criminals, specifically like figuring out if they were competent to stand trial or competent to be executed in Louisiana, and he passed away a couple of years ago. I would encourage anybody to look up he's got a tribute page on the internet. If you just Google William April with 2 L's, Aprill. Every podcast or interview he ever did was available for free, which is great. But he talked about how even with violent criminal actors, like actually bad people, we make the mistake of thinking of them as amoral people, right? In other words, they don't have any morals because they rob and they steal and they kill and they rape and whatever. When in reality, a lot of violent criminal actors have very rigid and strict moral codes. They're just different than yours and mine. And so the way that may manifest itself, which ties into kind of what we're talking about, is you got a guy who grew up in the wrong side of town, neglectful, abusive parents. He's faced a lifetime of both physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, whatever. And he's grown up. He's a criminal, gangbanger, whatever it is. And the only thing in the world he owns that has any value is this 1987 Chevy Monte Carlo that's worth $3,000. He's got rented 24-inch rims on it. A terrible purple paint job. It's just this hoopty, right? You rear end him. Now, to you and I, Laura, like from our worldview, like, oh shoot, I'm going to pull over. We're going to exchange. I'll apologize. We'll exchange insurance information, and that's it, right? But from his moral framework, where he comes from, we've just damaged the only thing in the world that he cares about, and he's got to, like, justice and retribution isn't insurance claims. It's I have to hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
I have to hurt you, and if I don't, I'm a punk. And once I'm a punk, I'll always be a punk. And so, appreciating. Like you say, it doesn't matter why it's happening. The thing that we need to accept is that when we interact with other human beings in contentious interactions, things can get real violent real quick. And most survivors of violence, whether it be with a neighbor they knew or a stranger they didn't, they'll comment on how quickly it happened. And they didn't have time to basically accept that it was happening and take action because they were just kind of in disbelief, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So guys, we're getting close to the hour mark here. So if you have questions for Chris as we move on, please drop those in the comments, and we'll gather those here shortly. That's funny that you talked about, and I can't remember what exactly you said. But one of my questions was, because I was thinking, well, what would maybe the audience want to know? What would be a good question? And one of them that I had down here was, how does someone really know if they have what it takes? How much training does somebody need? How do they, I've heard people ask that before, where they're just like, I just don't even know if I have it in me to be violent towards another person. I don't know if I could actually pull the trigger and these kinds of things. And I think it's funny because you already sort of touched on that. You said that when it really boils down to it, we all have the capability to protect ourselves.
Yeah. The really, really important thing, because a lot of bandwidth is given to the question of, like, can the average modern person use force and use lethal force? And I do think that there's things you can do, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But yeah, ultimately the answer is yes. Now, that being said, like, if you got into my blog, you probably saw there was a piece in there about my teenage daughter, and it's called self-image is everything. And frankly, in my decades of kind of contemplating and studying the human mindset when it comes to this kind of stuff, in that particular blog about self-image is everything, I was quoting the work of Lanny Bassam. Lanny Bassam was a 1970s world champion and Olympic champion shooter, and he wrote a book called With Winning in Mind, where he talked about kind of his mental framework for performance and performance management. And in the book, maybe my favorite part of it, he uses the analogy of our performance, basically like, okay, check it out. We're like a submarine when it comes to performance. Our conscious mind is the periscope. Our conscious mind sees and interprets the world around us and makes conscious decisions, right? Our subconscious mind, and our subconscious mind is what regulates our technical skills, our ability to draw our gun, press the trigger, get back on your sights and press the trigger again, or deploy your pepper spray, or use whatever jiu-jitsu technique is appropriate. Your subconscious mind is what regulates your, like if you had to throw something in the trash can, you wouldn't have to think about what you were doing. You're throwing stuff in the trash can 8 million times. It's burned into your subconscious. And so the subconscious, so if the conscious mind is your periscope, the subconscious is your engine. All right. Your engine basically is what allows you to move quickly. Because somebody who, like, for example, was shooting to make it very simple and on point for what we're talking about, somebody who is going to a shooting competition, if they're having to think about getting their hand, how do I grab my gun when it's in the holster? And then, okay, how do I pull it out? How do I get my sights in line? They're not going to move very fast, right? They're not going to have a very powerful engine. Same thing with a quarterback who, that takes a snap, he's got to drop back and he sees an open receiver. He wants to have that throwing motion just ingrained into the subconscious. And we emphasize subconscious performance a lot in the training industry. The area that I don't think we talk enough about is the third component. So periscope is our conscious mind, the engine is our subconscious mind, but self-image is the throttle. Self-image is basically what decides how much of the engine power we're going to get at any given time. Okay, and the reason self-image matters, because if it were Game 7 of the NBA Finals and Chris Cypert, at 43 years old, for some reason, was stepping to the free throw line to shoot 2 free throws with my team down by 1 point, like, I would probably be like, "Oh, Chris, don't screw this up," and like I would be picturing myself like missing it and bricking it and hanging my head in shame in front of the whole world. Whereas, Dirk Nowitzki,
I
Kobe
think a
Bryant.
lot of shooters think like that too, Chris.
Oh yeah, and
I've heard them.
And so, yeah, people get up there and it's time, if you're in a class where it's like, hey, this is going to be the final drill of the day and everybody's doing it one at a time for time. And people get into this like, oh, don't throw your shots. And their self-image is of somebody who's going to screw it up. And the greats.
And guess what happens?
Yeah. And so the greats, Larry Bird steps to the free throw line. He's like, oh, I'm going to make these free throws because that's what I do. That's who I am. Mm-hmm. They expect success. Now, you can't have a positive self-image without having done the subconscious work, right? Because then we all know those wildly irrational people, because it's almost like the Dunning-Kruger curve, where in the gun world, people who've done no training, there's a meme, I think I saw it on Babylon Bee, but it was like, new survey suggests the average adult male overestimates his ability to fight by 4,000%. You got all these dudes walking around out there that just think they were either like, oh, I don't train, bro, but if it's go time, I just see red and it's on. Like, no, if you run into a collegiate wrestler or jiu-jitsu brown belt, you're gonna get destroyed. That's all there is to it, Mm-hmm. Likewise, then people start to train and start disabusing themselves of their illusions about like how awesome they are, right? Guys who like have been shooting their whole lives actually take a few pistol classes, or they go compete and they're like, oh man, like I suck. And so you have to do the subconscious work. And having done the subconscious work, or at least being on your journey of doing the technical skills work that ingrains the skills in your subconscious, I think how you view yourself does matter. And it's got to be genuine. Like you can lie to everybody, but you can't lie to yourself, right?
Right.
That
you can try to lie to yourself.
What's that?
You can try to lie to yourself.
Sure. And I mean, I say that if you can convince yourself, then it's not really a lie when it comes to this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. And I think that like the reason I bring that up about just basically like we are literally descendants from the best killers in history, period. Every one of us exists. Our DNA, our genetics of human beings before us, or thousands or whatever, not a genealogist, of human beings who, when it came time to kill or be killed. And accepting that about yourself and like finding your why, finding your reason, And I think when it comes to that kind of thing, that from a self-image perspective, having talked about it, it's like, look, if so my oldest three kids are actually my stepkids, which I don't, I always refer to them as my kids. People will see us because their late father was a Colombian American, and so they've got Hispanic lineage, and people see super Northern European dude and wonder what's up. Yeah, so their dad was killed in Iraq in 2006, and they were very, very young. They had no memory of their dad whatsoever. And then we've got my fourth, Nolan, which is mine and Danielle's. So for me, my why, aside from the fact that I just don't want to die, is having raised, three kids, who lost their dad. And in that case, there was nothing their dad could have done. It was an IED attack. But yeah, I don't want my son, who just turned 5 yesterday, and my oldest kids, who are basically grown now, but like, I don't want them growing up without their dad. And if that means I've got to hurt somebody to go home at the end of the day, that I have to hurt somebody, then I'll hurt somebody. And so I'm going to avoid trouble all I can. But at the end of the day, if it's me or them, if they're between me and the door, so to speak, of getting home to my wife, who's already lost one husband, or my oldest 3 kids who've already lost one dad, it's going to be me. For a lot of moms and dads out there, I think their kids will be the pretty easy why. But you've got to find whatever it is that says, no, I'm making a decision that I'm not going to be the kind of person who just freezes up and gets murdered, freezes up and gets, beat to death, whatever it is. And having made that decision, then you got to go put the technical skills training into effect and like do what you can within reason and within your time and budget and so forth. But I actually think it starts with that decision of like, I'm the kind of person who, bottom line.
Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah. And I think for me personally, I think even exploring the possibility, that anything bad could ever even happen to you first, right? We have to get over that, because if we don't think anything bad could ever happen to us, we'll never consider it. And then we'll never take any steps to possibly prevent it. For me personally, in my story, that was the frame of mind that I had when I had my close call. And that was then ended up being the catalyst that brought me now here years later where I am. But that's really, really important. And thinking about those things in advance and making up your mind in advance, you're not going to have time to think.
Nope.
So that's really, really important.
And programming auto.
Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry.
So programming automatic responses is also really important. But as I tell people in my force on force class all the time, that a big part of the reason we're doing these scenarios is to get you guys thinking about it, where and there's varying degrees of success, right? If all you can do is just get on like John Korea's active self-protection channel and watch violent encounters and him break them down and be like, oh, okay, cool. If I was in an ATM and this happened, I'd do this. That's light years better than nothing, than just being in an ATM, getting robbed, which is pretty easily predictable over the course of your life that could happen. And then again, if you can take a quality force on force class, something like that, where you go into scenarios blind and like, okay, I'm getting out of my car, I'm walking into this convenience store, and not only your scenario or scenarios, but watching everybody else's is really valuable. The other thing too, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. So the other thing that I think can frankly inculcate, like something practical people can do, aside from just I'm going to make a decision that I'm a fighter, and I am a fighter, and that's who I am, and I'm not going to get stabbed to death in an ATM. I'm going to fight, and if I'm going to make them work for it, if nothing else. And a lot of people see me, and I'm 6'2", 270, pretty fit dude, and especially a lot of gals, a lot of older folks, that a lot of people that physically don't have the advantages that I do. And they're like, yeah, it's easy for you to say. But I think something that's really important to do some in your life, if your budget and your health and your time allow, is I am a strong advocate of at least engaging in some type of combative martial arts training, at least dabbling in it, at least getting exposure to it. And the reason I say that is because, and to keep in mind, I've got a bunch of really good friends who are, like black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, guys from, Craig Douglas, Cecil Birch. I was just talking to Paul Sharp this past weekend about this. And a lot of people, much like CrossFit, like CrossFitters get super motivated about CrossFit, like, oh, you got to do CrossFit. It's the best thing ever, because they like it and it's their hobby. Or And then a lot of martial artists are like that. That like they love jujitsu, so like you should come do jujitsu. So I'm here. I'm here
Mhm.
to tell you something pretty controversial. I don't like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I think you should do it. So this isn't coming from a guy who is advocating his hobby. I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu like I eat my vegetables, um,
Oh.
and but the reason I say that is because um, I think in terms of shaping a mentality for fighting, whether it be with guns, pepper spray, hands, or anything else. And the reason I recommend jujitsu specifically, there's some Krav Maga gyms in America that are good. There are some Krav Maga gyms in America that are worthless, and you're going to spend 6 months of time and money before you figure out which is which. If that makes sense. So,
Mhm.
and so Brazilian Jiu Jitsu has a really high floor and really good quality control across the country. Some gyms are better than others, but you can walk into any Brazilian Jiu Jitsu gym in America, get valuable skills, and then you're actually going to put them to the test in non-consensual, grappling and sparring with other people and find out if it works or not. Um,
Mhm.
and the other big thing specifically with that is, and this is a William April recommendation. He talked about how he said if you have a young woman in your life and you want her particularly to not be selected and targeted by sexual predators, specifically stranger initiated sexual predator, like stranger initiated rape, like getting drug into a van, that kind of thing, date rape
Mhm.
and acquaintance rape and stuff's an entirely different thing. But his recommendation was 1 year, 365 days of weekly or bi-weekly Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Now, my five
Mm.
foot six, 110-pound daughter is never going to physically develop to where she would intimidate somebody like me into deterring me, like, oh, she'd mess me up, right?
Mhm.
But putting my daughter in jiu-jitsu for a couple of years changed the way she moved, changed the way she walked, changed the way she carried herself. She knows that if a 200-pound, able-bodied 30-year-old man like wanted to put her on the ground and hurt her, he would eventually be able to do it. Now, he would have to work a lot harder with her than another 17-year-old girl who's not done that similar training. The
Mhm.
difference is, though, is that when that human predator is sitting in the parking lot watching teenage girls come out of the mall or movie theater or whatever it is, um, that human predator will absolutely be able to spot. Um, my daughter is comfortable rolling around on the ground with men, like men my size, my age, choking them, getting choked out. Like she will fight and she's comfortable fighting. She's not going to freeze up and freak out. She's like, oh, we're on the ground and we're fighting. This is going to suck, but I've done this before. And I think that I mean, literally, like go to a month worth of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and then go back once a quarter and just walk in there and like roll around with people for 30 minutes and get the crap kicked out of you and learn to be mentally composed in a fight. And
Mhm.
that is light years better than just never having been in a physical altercation in your life, and then expecting to summon the will and the
Right.
tenacity, pugnaciousness.
Totally agree. Yeah, good advice there. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
So we do have a couple questions here. He's excited, guys. You need to think of some more questions. I only got a couple. I need more. I love that. Let's see. Lisa wants to know what kind of safety plan do you have with your family and kids? Do you involve them in emergency planning?
Yeah. So yeah, I teach. So I teach a home defense class. Melody and John Johnson for a number of years have taught the armed parent guardian class, and I've helped out with that as well. Um, and a mantra that you'll hear at both classes, and really anytime this comes up, is if you have a home defense plan, and just a home protection plan in general, and your family's not on board with it, doesn't know what it is, then it doesn't exist.
Mhm.
And so for my yes, I've got a number of plans, and this goes back to the what, and we've got uh, not just a single fire drill, so to speak, but also like literally um, think. And this goes back to the whole planning and Green Beret thing, right? Um, I don't have a home defense plan. I have home defense plans, for example, which is to say that like daytime, nighttime, everybody's asleep. There's an intruder in the house or somebody outside the house, whatever it may be. Um, we have literally because I've got a split floor plan where all the kids' bedrooms are on the other end of the house, which I hate, but it is what it is. So yeah, I've got actually right behind me. You know what? If you can see right, hang on. Hang on. You see over one of my shoulders there. You see that thing next to the light switch? There it is. See that thing?
Yeah.
blue thing, that's an air horn.
Oh, yeah.
So if I wake up in the middle of the night and like, I don't know, my phone's vibrating, I look at my motion detecting cameras and there's 4 dudes with ski masks and rifles coming down the driveway. I'm
Mhm.
literally opening my door and letting loose that thing and waking everybody up in the house. Guess what's on the other end of the house next to my daughter's bedroom? Exact same thing. If she wakes
Another
up in the
one.
middle of the night trying to
Yeah.
crawl through a window or hears somebody in her brother's room, she's letting loose the air horn. And I know, it's basically like if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, it's the horn of Gondor, and here I come. Uh, same thing in public.
Do you
Exact
have
same
air
thing in
horns in
public.
public? I'm kidding.
No,
It's a
no,
joke. I'm
no.
not good at
But like
jokes.
have plans in public where now we're at a weird age where like my 5-year-old is along for the ride. Like he's not, he's still a couple of years away from really getting. Maybe I don't know. Within the next year or two, he'll start getting an education on. Hey, if you ever hear Dad see this or see Dad do this, here's what we're going to do. He's just along for the ride. My
Mhm.
kids, my oldest kids now, are active participants. Like in the home plan, like my daughter has her own dedicated home defense gun and a quick access safe. And if I'm not home, then she'll handle business. But yeah, my older kids all had age appropriate guidance to where like, hey, if Dad ever says this, does this, this is what you're supposed to be doing. This is what you're not supposed to be doing, which is like asking why and actively fighting me as I'm trying to drag you down between 2 cars in a parking lot or whatever it is. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, at the end of the day, even in 2020, when I was in Tacoma, Washington, which got pretty draconian. Washington did with COVID stuff. And right after it happened, everything closed, and you got a whole bunch of service industry folks who were living paycheck to paycheck who were suddenly unemployed. And I was worried you were going to see this, and we started seeing it some where people were getting robbed for their shopping carts full of groceries. Like a month after the lockdowns had started, people didn't have groceries.
Mhm.
It's like, screw it, I'm going to go to Safeway and I'm going to jack somebody for a load of groceries and feed my kids. And from a
Mhm.
moral standpoint, I have a hard time blaming them. But my wife and I were like, okay, do we want to take the kids with us to go shop? Do we want to or does just one of us want to go, one of us stay with the kids, or do we want to leave the kids home alone and both of us go to where we can basically tag team the parking lot danger at Costco or Safeway or whatever else? And we fell on that. And I would literally brief my kids up on like, hey, if anybody knocks on the door, don't answer it. If somebody delivers a package, don't open the door to get the package. If somebody steals the package, let him go. If somebody starts forcing entry, all right, Gabriel, you get to 1022 and post up at the top of the stairs. Xavier, you're going to grab Nolan. You're going to get him up behind Gabriel at the top of the stairs. And Anna, you're on 911 duty, and you're going to call. Here's the script that I actually had printed off, and like you're going to read this off, give them the info, hang up, and then you're going to call me, and we'll be here in 5 minutes. And everybody knew their job, and it took
Mhm.
less time to explain to them and practice it a couple of times almost than it took for me to explain it here.
Mhm.
But literally just having my kids be like, oh, okay, cool. If somebody ever like tries to break in, I do X, Y, and Z. Or if I'm in public and somebody tries to abduct me, I do, A, B, and C, whatever it is.
Cool. Okay. All right. I kind of feel like we need to wrap up here because we're over the hour. I do want to give you an opportunity, Chris, to talk about how can people train with you? Do you have anything coming up where people can meet you in person? And what's going on over at Citizens Defense Research?
Absolutely. So, and for what it's worth, by the way, if you get any more questions coming in, I'm happy to keep going. But if you can't, then that's cool. Um,
Okay.
but I'm at your service. But speaking real brief, let me pull up. So yeah, I'm at Citizens Defense Research. If you go to citizensdefenseresearch.com, I see you get the links and all that stuff down there. So I'm going to be in Ohio teaching my home defense class in Brookville, Ohio on the 21st, and my force on force class in Brookville, Ohio on the 22nd. Then I'll be in Mansfield, Ohio, November 3rd, teaching my mental agility preparation and planning skills, which is literally an 8-hour seminar on the mental approach to also like how to assess risk, how to plan, and you can apply that template to whatever area of your life you want to.
I've heard that's a good
And so
class.
that's lots for that. November 4th, I'll be in Mansfield, Ohio, teaching the Force on Force class again. And then December 2nd and 3rd, I'll be teaching the middle agility class and the Force on Force class in Central Texas at Carl Rand's place down in KR Training in Lincoln, Texas. And if you get on our Eventbrite page, our website has a link to our Eventbrite page. You can find those. Then I'll be like the 2024 calendar. Yeah, 2024 calendar is actually still taking shape. I need to get off my butt, get some stuff scheduled. But and then all my blog, whatever else. And any more questions?
Yeah, we've got one more here, and then let's see.
All right, I'll do that one, and then I'll go away if you want me to.
I don't want you to go away. I just don't want to take too much time.
Oh, no, no,
Let's see.
I'm down.
Since you mentioned Lanny Basham, do you utilize a training journal on a regular basis, and do you find daily affirmations helpful?
Um, so training journal, um, not lately. At periods of time in my life that I have, and I think they're invaluable. And this is very much a so the first part of that, training journals are incredibly valuable. And to be honest with you, if I woke up tomorrow and decided, like, right now, from a like pistol shooting perspective, I don't have any like I don't have any like short term, long term goals. I've gotten to a point in my life where um, if I could just maintain my current level of performance, like from now until the day I die, I'd be fine with that, and I know what it takes to do that. That being said, I may get the itch at some point. I was just going back and forth with some folks on the internet not too long ago about pistol competition, so I may start shooting IDPA and USPSA. And if I were to engage in that, then I would absolutely resume that. So
Mhm.
if you have anywhere you're trying to go, then I think training journals are definitely a roadmap to get that done. And I think for most people who are still trying to get to what they consider a baseline modicum of competency that they can employ on
Mhm.
demand, I think training journals are really valuable. As far as daily affirmation, kind of the same thing. Um, and this is just me being transparent. The easy thing for me to do would be like, yes, I use it every day, and you should use it every day too. But I try to be real with folks. Um, Given my unique experiences over the last 20 plus years, I have a really, really, really solid sense of, I guess, myself and like what I'm capable of. So I don't engage in like a daily kind of affirmation routine where like okay, and it's the joke for those of a certain age will remember the Stuart Smalley, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. So for me, there's not a ton of value in that kind of thing. Um, that being said, again, if I was like, hey, you know what, in X amount of years, I want to be a USPSA GM level shooter, I'd probably start to do some of that in that specific, specific vein. But I frankly think for folks that I teach, like when I teach these force on force classes, when I teach the mental agility planning, preparation and planning skills class, MAPS, as we call it, building mental maps to success. Um, I think a lot of people do need that, frankly. There's a lot of folks out there who I know are better shooters, better performers, and far more competent than they recognize. And they just kind of have this low self esteem about them. And it's
Mhm.
what I tell people is I'm like, look, you have one of the hardest things to do on this journey that we're all on to be, safer, more competent self protectors for ourselves and our loved ones. One of the hardest things to do is to know when to pat ourselves on the back and when to slap ourselves in the face or kick ourselves in the butt. That so I most of among my circle of friends and like the instructor community, I'm like one of the crappiest shooters. Relative to guys like Gabe White or John Johnson or Scott Jedlinski, guys like Bill Blowers, guys like that. And if all I ever do is hang out with those dudes and shoot, I'm just gonna get like real low self esteem. Like, man, I suck, right? So it becomes really important when I feel myself kind of like hanging my head. Um, like, and don't get me wrong, like you always want to get better, but you don't want to get just disillusioned and depressed. Go to a public gun range and like, and I will legit, like go to just an indoor public gun range, get down on lane 3 and spend a half hour, an hour shooting. And I'm mindful to look at the targets to my left and right and be like, oh no, I'm pretty much a wizard in the general population.
Mhm.
The blue belt in the jujitsu gym who gets the crap kicked out of him by purple belts and brown belts and black belts all day in the Walmart parking lot is the baddest dude walking into Walmart, right? Likewise, if you're the worst shooter at at your pistol class, um, you're still the only person out of the you're one of the only 10 people or 20 people out of however many gun owners are in your city actually out training, and you're basically a wizard. So um, I think that with that kind of thing, yeah, people really need to affirm themselves, not just with like positive self-talk, but I think that like step out of your bubble of like gun nerds, and
Mhm.
like, yeah, just go to a public range and watch other people shoot and be like, oh no, man, I'm pretty awesome actually, relative to the general populace. And that's hugely important for your own sanity.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, I don't see any more questions. Wait, maybe that's one. Nope, we did that one. Okay, so I don't see any more questions. So, do you have any parting thoughts before we go here? And then I'm going to tell all of you people what to expect for next week.
Yeah, no, I'll just, frankly, um, going back to kind of the blog stuff we're talking about at the beginning, um, one of the biggest benefits to being a dangerous person is that being dangerous and formidable and knowing what I realistically might encounter, knowing I can handle myself in those encounters, and also knowing what to look for when things are, possibly going to kick off and get dangerous. And in which case I would just get in my car and leave if I could, spot
Mm-hmm.
it early enough. One of the best side effects of that, though, is that it does two things. One, the situational awareness and paying attention to my surroundings enables me to notice a lot of stuff I'd otherwise miss about the world. One, just cool stuff, right? Dad playing with his kids at the park. An elderly couple, in McDonald's that's been together clearly for 70 years and they're still so in love. I notice so many of those things because I pay attention to the world around me. And then also because I basically know what I'm capable of and what I'm not. And I know how to handle, like what I'm looking out for and whether or not I can handle it. And when I need to, when it's time to fight, when it's time to get out of Dodge, that frankly allows me to be a lot more relaxed in public and friendly with people.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a very generic example, certainly I don't want anybody to take his advice, but like I am more likely to pull over and help somebody with car trouble myself. And, for some folks who are just starting out, but like I basically, the lifestyle that I'm advocating and kind of the worldview I'm advocating is the opposite of paranoia and fear.
Mm-hmm.
It's figuring out how to mitigate what you can mitigate, and then just relaxing and enjoying life. And this journey and gaining competence in these skills and kind of this worldview will allow you to enjoy life more freely, encounter and engage with more people in positive ways. And I can't recommend that highly enough. It's something I'm super thankful for that I've been fortunate to have these experiences that allowed me to get to this point in my life. So, yeah, like get dangerous and then you can go be cool to people. That's a lot of fun.
That's so well said, Chris. Thank you so much for your time. Sorry we went over the hour here, but I don't think you minded at all. You
No,
were
no,
late to the
once in
party
a while.
anyway, so
Yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. It's okay. You just you kinda gave me a heart attack towards the beginning, but then like, "Well, it's live. We're just gonna roll with it. Hope he shows up," and you did, so no worries.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, no,
All
I
right.
was having technical difficulties with Chrome and a bunch of other boring stuff. Oh,
Oh,
we got
yeah,
one.
no
We
worries.
got
Are
one.
you No, I don't think it's a question.
No, it's not a question. Although he hits on something real positive, which is basically, and this gets into what we were talking about earlier, like with my daughter. My daughter's not trying to like beat up 200-pound men. She's just trying to look more dangerous than the average 17-year-old girl. And
Yeah.
like continuing to like work on your skills, whether it be fitness or martial arts or shooting.
Mhm.
If you can just put yourself in the top percentile of your demographic,
Right.
that's going to select you from a whole lot of trouble. So yeah, absolutely. Good point.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, cool. All right, well, thank you so much for your time, Chris. I'm gonna move on here to what we can expect next week. All right. So before we get on to what's coming next week, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me tonight, going over the hour. Hey, we're live and we're gonna make everything work. For everybody who is currently supporting the Defenders Live community on locals.com, thank you so much for that. That means so much to me, and I have some plans for that in the future. I want to let you guys know that episode 3 is now available on that Defenders Uncensored series on locals.com. You can look for that on the Discover tab on locals.com if you search up Defenders Live. Defenders Uncensored is packed full of slightly inappropriate humor, lots of truth, and honest conversations about topics that are sometimes considered controversial, but we don't think they should be. And if you're easily offended or don't have a sense of humor, this series might not be for you. So jump over to the Defenders Live community on locals.com. I hope to see you there. Now, for next week, on October 4th. Oh man, next week is October. On October 4th, we're going to have Jeff Anderson from Warrior Life. Now, this is somebody that is outside of our like typical gun training community. So I like to bring outsiders in with different points of view and different looks on life. And so I'm really looking forward to this interview. Jeff actually interviewed Adam on his show, his Warrior Life podcast, I think probably 3 or 4 months ago. So if you want to check that out, it's on the Defenders USA YouTube channel under the interviews and other appearances section. So you can check that out there. Jeff Anderson is a lifelong student of what he calls survival arts. His military training led him to seek out strategies that would protect not only himself on the battlefield, but also provide for his family's own self-reliance in any sort of disaster, crisis, or collapse. After 10 years of military training in elite infantry units around the world, he began working as a security consultant and executive protection specialist for private citizens and the entertainment industry. In Jeff's survival training, it was his service overseas and in combat missions that he was able to get a first-hand glimpse of what a city gripped in collapse and without rule of law looks like for its citizens, and he uses his unique experience to inject a more realistic view of what to expect in survival scenarios and provide practical solutions, even in extreme environments for true survivalists. Ultimately, his training and experience has led him to create Warrior Life, which is fueled by more than 100 of the world's top instructors in law enforcement, military, and civilian survival schools. So I'm looking forward to interviewing Jeff Anderson next week of Warrior Life. I hope that you'll join me again next week, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. We'll see you then. Until then,